Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, losing the only leader you've ever known. How will the death of President Hugo Chavez impact Venezuela's youth? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, at least on social media, the lines since Chavez's death have been pretty clearly drawn.
And it's coming out throughout all social media platforms. It's on Twitter, it's Facebook. It's also on Instagram, where I have this. And among those anti and pro, there's also this call for unity, like this picture from Alejo88 shows. It's a Venezuelan flag with the words, "What we all want," being sewn together by two hands. So for those of you at home, we want you to join in this conversation as well. So do so by using the hashtag AJStream.
And joining us on set is Keen Bott. He is a writer for the North American Congress on Latin America. He's worked both here in the U.S. and in Latin America on a variety of campaigns related to community development and social justice. Keen, welcome to the stream.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Glad to have you. I'd also like to welcome our guests in the Google Plus Hangout who are joining us for today's discussion. Of course, you can join the stream via Google Plus as well. All you have to do is go to that link right there at the bottom of the screen, and add us to your circles.
Hi, I'm Hugh McLeod. I'm a cartoonist, and I'm in the stream.
Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez died after a 2-year battle with cancer. The charismatic socialist president first took power in 1999, making him the only leader that Venezuela's youth have ever known. Much like the rest of the country, Chavez had a divisive effect on the estimated 7.5 million Venezuelans between the ages of 18 and 30. Early in his presidency, he created a ministry for youth and appointed young people to important positions. He used Venezuela's oil profits on social programs, empowering the youth in poor areas by giving them access to education and health care. Others, however, saw a different outcome. They viewed Chavez as an autocrat. Homicides, mainly involving young men, skyrocketed as accusations of corruption and nepotism dogged his administration. Government intervention in the private sector created few quality jobs, forcing Venezuela's emerging generations to look for work in neighboring countries. So, with all of this, what legacy has Chavez really left behind for Venezuela's youth? Also joining us is Oscar Guardiola, a Latin American author and supporter of the late President Hugo Chavez. He also teaches international politics, philosophy, and law at Birkbeck College at the University of London. Oscar, how did Chavez change the way Venezuelans, especially the young people, see themselves?
Well, for the first time in history, we saw a sector of Venezuela's population becoming part of the political arena. And this absolutely gave the youth of Venezuela an opportunity and a platform to reinvent their country and their own history. That is going to be Chavez's most important legacy.
Miguel, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like Chavez empowered young people in politics and gave them a platform to express their voice?
Yes, he certainly did, but he also leaves the country divided in two and the young people divided in two. The country is polarized at all levels. At the university, higher education level, probably a larger majority of students are opposition than pro-Chavez, and it reverts as you go down. So I think the youth is as polarized, and that what they will see going forward is something totally different in politics than from what they saw before in their lives. After all, if you were 10 when Chavez took power, you are 24 today.
You know, usually the youth are the ones that spur opposition movements, that spur change. Chavez somehow managed to have a revolution really without a lot of young people. How do you think he did that, Miguel?
Well, the youth, the educated youth at the universities feels that their universities have not been treated right by Chavez. Remember that the most universities were pro-Chavez in 1998. Today you find that Chavismo does not, at the student level, did not win any student council elections at any university other than the newly created universities by Chavismo, which are a minority of the number of students.
Well, Nadine de Soto, in our Google Plus Hangout, you're a young Venezuelan, and you're speaking to us from Caracas. I want your thoughts on this, but also on these two tweets. This one's from Andre, who says, millions of Venezuelan youth have never experienced a president other than Chavez, myself included. And that's something, of course, that was just alluded to. And there's another one from Martha, who says, Chavez is dead. It's time for a Latin American spring, where individual rights are upheld, where property is respected. So Nadine, you just moved back to Venezuela, but you were born and were raised there. Is this an opportunity for Venezuelan youth to unite, like we heard earlier?
Most certainly. I think that you know, the events of yesterday and the past few months have given Venezuelan youth an opportunity for somber self-reflection and for looking back on the past 14 years, which make up the majority of our lives, and to reflect critically on what have been the crises of the past few years. However, we also see this as an opportunity for reconciliation, for moving forward in the spirit of inclusion of the many plural political voices that has long been pushed to the sidelines in Venezuela. So I think for youth, this is really an opportunity. Many feel that we don't have opportunities to really make a difference in our society because barriers to involvement are very high. So I would agree with those two tweets.
Keen, right now, young people, as the rest of the country, is contemplating life without Chavez. And typically young people are the ones that have these minds that are rich with possibility, right? So do you think that there are a lot of young folks in Venezuela that feel they're at a crossroads right now and they're weighing this and saying, do we want the legacy of Chavez to continue, or do we want to take life in a different direction for younger generations?
Well, I think that if you look at the legacy of Chavez and you look at the inclusion that Professor Guardiola was talking about, and which Octavio also alluded to, that form of inclusivity, which previously, prior to Chavez, had not really existed, that is something that I think a lot of different sectors of the youth will be interested in upholding and to further deepening. So take, for example, higher education. In the United States, student debt is a humongous problem for young people. In Venezuela, you've had a doubling of enrollment among young people for higher education. So you have a doubling of enrollment in colleges and universities, and you're provided that for free as a public service. So these are the kinds of popular programs that bolstered his popularity, and it's the kind of social democracy, those kinds of principles of free higher education, free healthcare for millions. Those are the kinds of platforms that he ran on, that he actually was able to fulfill, and those are going to be the legacies of his 14 years, as even the opposition groups now have to basically take into account the will of the general public in terms of having a right to education, to housing, to healthcare, etc. And so even in the previous election with Enrique Capriles, he did not eschew the social programs. In fact, he said that I want them to run even better or more efficiently. So the opposition has actually had to reintegrate into that narrative that Chavez has helped to develop, in which all of these different sectors of the Venezuelan population are accustomed to now taking in the benefits of the oil wealth of the country.
And in reintegrating in that narrative, as you said, there seems to be two threads. Francisco Toro, I want to direct this to you. It's a Facebook comment from Tom, who says, hopefully the youth of Venezuela will be inspired by Chavez's legacy, while at the same time critical of the more authoritarian aspects of his governance. Now, Francisco, you're a politics blogger at Caracas Chronicles. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the youth of Venezuela right now is made up of people who have no experience in their lifetimes of seeing a president has any kind of checks or balances on his power. So when you think about a democratic election in a normal democratic country, what you elect is a constitutional officer who has a list of powers, but then also has institutions looking over their shoulders to make sure that they don't abuse their powers. In Venezuela, that completely broke down over the last 14 years. So we've seen Chavez ordering the jailing of judges live on TV, and that judge, Judge Maria Lourdes Afiune, is still under house arrest now. She also has cancer. We've seen Chavez make up multi-million-dollar allocations off the cuff, off the top of his head, live on TV. And so this experience of state power as just your whim, just a thing that comes to the top of your head, that comes off your head if you happen to be powerful, I think that's very deeply corrosive, and that is the experience of power that a whole generation of Venezuelan young people have now.
Jesus Silva, I know that you want to respond to that, and you're a constitutional lawyer and professor of political studies in Caracas. Go ahead. Looks like you might need to unmute your microphone.
I want to remark that the existence of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela is not an accident. He came into a Venezuela which was previously divided in a deep problem of discrimination and difference among social classes. So for that reason, he historically became the candidate of the poor. It is not an accident that during 14 years he was victorious election after election. Just last October 7th, he demonstrated once again that 8 million voters are more than 6 million voters. His victory was made from 10 points of percent. So that indicates that his policy of social inclusion, of giving help to the poor, of public services was effective. Within 30 days, we will have another election. We will have a new president in Venezuela. And all polls indicate that Chavez will have a victorious candidate, which is Nicolas Maduro.
Francisco, some people will call that social inclusion, but others call it a tool of oppression, which is by giving just enough to the poor to keep them eating, to keep roofs over their head. You also maintain control over them. What do you say to that?
It's very clear that in order to maintain access to the generous social benefits that the revolution has brought about, you need to be a paid-up member of the Chavez cult of personality. Now, is he extremely popular? He is. Jesus is absolutely right. Millions of Venezuelans really feel for him and are in pain, and my condolences go out to them. It is a genuine popular feeling, people's love for the president. That does not change the fact that he has badly undermined the institutions that make democratic life possible.
Yeah, if I can respond to that. I think that if you look at the institutional collapse, this was actually a key component of what preceded Chavez. In the 18 years that preceded him, from 1980 to 1998, you actually had an absolute decline in living standards if you look at per capita GDP. Since Chavez took over control over state oil resources, you've actually seen pretty respectable growth, about 2.5% GDP a year. So the idea that the Venezuelan people are simply clinging on to some kind of basic subsistence living is just not borne out by the economic realities.
There are people that would argue, though, that oil wealth would have come to pass regardless of Chavez's presence or lack thereof, so there would have been a natural lifting of the poor. That's
actually a result of the political will of Chavez. So you don't get a reduction of 50% of poverty and a reduction of 70% in absolute poverty without actually fighting for that. The Punto Fijo era that preceded Chavez was one in which you had two political parties basically alternating governmental institutions through a pact, an implicit pact, which maintained that kind of a stranglehold on the political system while economic elites managed the resources of the country. So it's not simply a testament to high oil prices, it's actual, political leveraging and the kinds of fights that he took on. I mean, the oil crisis was a crippling crisis to Venezuela when the state oil company actually instituted a strike. And despite that, and taking on those powerful vested interests is what has allowed Venezuela to actually implement these kinds of social programs.
Well, Oscar, it's interesting because what we seem to be hearing are these absolutes. There's a tweet here from Eli who says, Chavez was a populist, promising houses, food, services, in exchange of votes. He only gave those services in electoral times. But then on Facebook, we have this argument going back and forth. Saf Gold says, Hugo is a really nice president that makes the poor become rich from the national oil wealth. And then someone writes back, Suzanne says, which poor have become rich? Chavez? Yes, very rich. So Oscar, can you give us your thoughts on these two extremes, these absolutes?
Well, it is a shame that we seem to continue to evaluate politics in the 21st century with the concepts that were perhaps useful in the 1970s or 1980s. To speak of populism or only the corruption of those who cling on to power and get rich is not to understand that a character like Hugo Chavez is not a politician of the past, but rather a politician of the future. In fact, today, some of the magazines here in London were comparing Chavez to Boris Johnson, the current mayor of London, who is far from being a leftist, and nevertheless shares with Chavez a certain quality to connect directly to the people and to appear in the media. That kind of showmanship is very different from the populism that perhaps some might have seen in the 70s and 80s. But it is also the case, as was pointed out by the previous commentator, that Chavez didn't fall from the sky. He's not an accident. There were social movements active before the rise of Chavez, breaking up the Pact of Punto Fijo, and it was them who brought Chavez to power. Let us also remember that it was them who brought him back after the failed US-backed coup d'etat. So there isn't here some sort of straight vertical relationship between the leader and the people, a leader who's buying the people. Let us not dismiss the intelligence of the people.
Okay.
It was the social movements who brought Chavez to power, and surely they will continue to find new ways.
Right. Nadine, I want to get back to this idea of the legacy that Chavez is leaving to Venezuela's youth. You are on the ground in Venezuela. You're a politically active young woman. I want to get a sense from your perspective what your peer group is thinking right now, and whether you think that the young people in Venezuela have the power to tilt the upcoming election.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to say that for us, it is an opportunity, like I said before, for a change. You know, over the past few years, we have seen one crisis after another, and a government that is not only completely incompetent in managing those crises, but also we have seen the centralization of powers and the complete misuse of state resources for political purposes. And I think that there is definitely no denying the symbolic validation of historically marginalized groups over the past few years, but what does that really mean in terms of tangible gains and improvements of quality of life? So I think that that is one of our main motivations for young people right now. We're looking for ways to maintain this legacy, however, within a government and a political system that is constitutionally respectful and that allows for the inclusion of multiple voices. So that is. And for the state resources not to be squandered on propaganda and on the mythification, really, of this character who is now being sold to us as the father of the nation, when really we know that half of us do not agree and have not agreed for years with his social and economic and policy. So,
Miguel, our community seems to want to talk about what the opportunities for youth are going to be if, in this new post-Chavez era. There's a video comment here I'd like you to have a listen to.
The Venezuelan youth have never experienced having a president other than Hugo Chavez. His legacy is mixed, a predisposition to personalism over institutions. People often see political opponents as enemies, while at the same time the notion that youth matters in politics and that attention to the poor is key. In the end, his legacy will be as controversial and debated as his own presidency.
Actually, that was the wrong video comment, but that one was on the legacy. So could you speak to that, but then also to the question of what the opportunities, the economic opportunities are going to be for youth?
Well, right now, opportunities for youth are quite limited because the main growth in employment in Venezuela has been the government. The reduction of the private sector has reduced opportunities. There's been a brain drain of the more talented people outside of the country. I come from an academic background, and most of my friends live abroad because they were forced to leave. And I think that's what the youth wants. And I think that's why university students have been so important in demanding different things at various times, like when the television station RCTV was shut down in 2007. It was the students that led that movement. And I think whoever comes in the future has to integrate the country, because Chavez's legacy is one of increasing the consciousness that the poor should not exist in Venezuela, but you cannot do that by completely ignoring and discriminating half of the population of the country.
Keen, you look like you want to jump in, so I'll wait with my question and allow you to respond.
Sure. Well, I think that there's a kind of a strain in this discussion that wants to perhaps cast doubt as to the actual improvements in quality of life and say that, yes, he's provided some kind of philosophical or a kind of a legacy of thinking towards inclusivity. But if we're going to talk about practical, concrete terms, when we're talking about the youth, let's keep in mind that over the past 10 years, you've reduced infant mortality by 1/3. So this is a direct impact on so many Venezuelan youth. But I think more importantly, I think that youth throughout Latin America, those who say that they haven't, lived in a time before Chavez, the time before Chavez was one of a U.S.-imposed economic model called neoliberalism. And I think that Chavez's historical legacy is going to be one of uniting the continent to basically push back against this model of development called neoliberalism, which imposed savage cuts in the public sector, which imposed massive amounts of privatization. And you're seeing the ongoing impacts of that throughout Europe and even in the United States. If you were to have a president like Hugo Chavez, or perhaps even like FDR, that provided these kinds of basic social democratic programs, you would absolutely see the same kind of enthusiasm when students can go to school for free, when healthcare is free. Those are the kinds of things that a first world country...
It's great to go to school for free, but when you come out of school and there are no jobs available to you, that's problematic.
But keep in mind that the private sector outpaced the public sector for much of the upturn since 2004. So if you look at sectors like real estate, if you look at sectors like banking, the private sector is doing actually quite well. So this is a kind of a canard that's being thrown around, that he's been crimping down on the private sector when you see expansions in many of these different sectors in the private sphere.
Francisco, I want to get back to you. We've got about a minute left in the program. What do you see as the biggest challenge moving forward?
The biggest challenge moving forward is that the nation has no democratic institutions that work aside from an order given from the presidential palace, and that's no way to build a democracy.
And what do you see happening in the next 30 days? Do you think elections may be moved up to capitalize on the high emotion of the country, or?
Well, 30 days is already extremely short. It's going to be a very volatile, very strange campaign, and a very short campaign. A third of it is going to be taken up by what I expect will be an extraordinary funeral. And I can't think of any precedent for an election campaign like this one anywhere in the world. So I'm quite concerned. It could go violent even, or not, who knows?
All right, that's going to do it for us today. We are out of time, but I want to thank all of our guests for joining us. Now, on the next program, maybe one person can't change the world, but they can certainly change a country. Some of the most powerful women on the planet aren't famous, and you don't know their names, but they are doing big things, and you're going to meet them on the next AJ Stream. Until then, we'll see you online.